सादर प्रणाम। एनसीईआरटी की सुने और सीखें वेबिनार सीरीज़ लिसनिंग टू लर्न में एक बार फिर से आप सभी का स्वागत है। आज की इस कड़ी में हमारे पास बेंगलोर से डॉक्टर मृदुला रमन्ना जुड़ी हैं, जो कि SIES कॉलेज ऑफ आर्ट्स साइंस एंड कॉमर्स से संबंधित रही हैं, बम्बई से संबंधित रही हैं। आज हमारे साथ वो औपनिवेशिक भारत में, औपनिवेशिक बम्बई में महिला चिकित्सकों की भूमिका के ऊपर चर्चा करेंगी। आपका स्वागत है प्रोफेसर रमन्ना। और यहाँ दिल्ली के स्टूडियोज़ में मेरे साथ मेरी कुलीग और मेरे विभाग की विभागाध्यक्ष डॉक्टर सुनीता फरकिया आज हमारे साथ शामिल हैं। और आज की परिचर्चा हमारी इस कड़ी की 8वीं कड़ी है। और हम इस तरह व्यूअर्स आप सब जानते हैं कि इस कड़ी के अंदर सुने और सीखें, इस कड़ी के संबंध में हम लगातार लगभग हर शुक्रवार को एक सुबह 10 से 11 आपके समक्ष प्रस्तुत होते हैं। आपके सवाल लेने की कोशिश करते हैं, आपसे इंटरेक्शन करने का पूरा प्रयास करते हैं। आप अपने सवाल हमसे NCERT की ऑफिशियल ईमेल साइट dth.cet8 dth.class10 11 और 12@nic.in ये ईमेल एड्रेस आपके स्क्रीन पर आ रहे हैं। आप इन पर हमें सीधे सवाल भी दे सकते हैं और साथ साथ NCERT के NCERT ऑफिशियल यूट्यूब चैनल पर हमसे जुड़ सकते हैं। अपने सवाल आप हमें दे सकते हैं। हम आपके प्रश्नों को सम्मिलित करने का भरपूर भरसक प्रयास करेंगे। अब मैं अपने साथी डॉक्टर सुनीता फरकिया से प्रार्थना करता हूं कि डॉक्टर मृदुला रमन्ना का स्वागत करें और उनके बारे में हमारे सारे व्यूअर्स को बताएं।
ठीक, धन्यवाद। गुड मॉर्निंग एंड वार्म वेलकम टू दिस program listening to learn series of NCERT. I am feeling great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Mridula Ramanna. A well-known historian, Dr. Mridula Ramanna, she completed her bachelor's and master's program in history from Delhi University and a PhD from University of Mumbai. She is the former head of Department of History, South Indian Education Society's College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Mumbai. Dr. Ramanna has 34 years of teaching experience, including postgraduate and undergraduate teaching at Delhi University, Mumbai and Bengaluru. She has authored Facets of Public Health in Early 20th Century Bombay in 2020, Healthcare in Bombay Presidency 1896 to 1930. She published this book in 2012. Then Western Medicine and Public Health in Colonial Bombay from 1845 to 1895 in 2002, and Edward Moore in 2014. She has 62 publications including chapters in edited volume and peer reviewed journals. So, we are fortunate enough, Madam, Dr. Ramanna, and we feel blessed to have you today's session and on this forum. I welcome you once again. Thank you so much.
It's all yours, Dr. Ramanna, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta and Madam, for that very generous introduction. It's always a pleasure to interact with students, especially for retired professionals like us. We miss our interaction with students, and I hope I am clear. Now, Dr. Gupta actually suggested this topic, and I'm glad he did, because this is a topic which I don't know how many of you in the audience are familiar with, and that is women physicians in Colonial Bombay. Now, as you are aware, there was a very high maternal and infant death rate, and this is what led to the Indian initiative in founding and financing obstetric facilities from the middle of the 19th century in Colonial Bombay. The first obstetric institution, as you can see, this is the famous JJ Hospital. Attached to this was the obstetric institution opened in 1851. But the number of patients were few because, as you are perhaps aware, an average Indian woman would not dream of showing herself to a male doctor. And the very idea of hospitalization for something as domestic as childbirth was unheard of. The next landmark is the what is called the Medical Women for India Fund. And this has a very interesting story in that it was founded by a Parsi social reformer called Sorabji Shapurji Bengali and an American businessman, George Kittredge. Now, George Kittredge, one of his Indian friends, lost his favorite daughter in childbirth. So these two gentlemen got together and founded the Medical Women for India Fund in 1882. The objectives were medical education for women. Grant Medical College, founded in 1845, admitted women in 1883, and the first graduate trained in Western medicine, a lady called Annie Walk. She was from Goa. She passed out in 1888. And the second objective of the Medical Women for India Fund was to establish a hospital for women and children to be managed by women. That was what was very vital. So Kama Hospital opened in 1886 with a generous donation from the business magnate Pestonji Hormasji Kama. And attached to it was a dispensary, Jafar Suleiman Dispensary, and attached to that was this All Bless Hospital. It still exists, you can see the picture. It's close to VT station, and this was founded in 1888. Now, this Medical Women for India Fund, in a sense, is a very important landmark in that you now have, slowly but surely, women coming to hospitals. The next slide you will see is from the Hindi Punch. The Hindi Punch is an Anglo-Gujarati journal, and they had cartoons and sketches. Now this particular slide talks about one Dr. Miss Emmeline D'Cunha. She was the first lady bacteriologist from Bombay, and Hindi Punch congratulates Miss D'Cunha on her success and hopes that she will prove useful to my poor lady Bombay at this trying juncture. Now, when for the fourth time she is in the throes of a horrid, untimely death. Now, what is Hindi Punch referring to? Hindi Punch is referring to the plague which struck Bombay in 1896, and the hope is that Emmeline D'Cunha would help out. Now, what is interesting is that the first graduates came from the family of male doctors. You have Atmaram Pandurang Tarkar, his daughter, Manik Bahadurji Tarkar, Violet Tarkar, his granddaughter, and his brother's granddaughter. All became doctors. Avanbai Mehta, she was the assistant medical officer in Kama Hospital for many years. She too had a physician elder sister who died early. Now, as I said, it opened, the Bombay University, Grant Medical College opened their doors to women in 1883, and by 1913, 66 women had graduated. These included Europeans, Eurasians, Parsis, of course, Indian Christians, Hindus, and Jews. It was not a graduate degree as such, but a licentiate in medicine and surgery, and some of them served at that Kama hospital, the picture of which I showed you. Others took to private practice. Now, private practice was lucrative because Indians would go to Indian doctors. You know, they would feel more comfortable going to Indian doctors. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Indian doctors, whether male or female, were very vital intermediaries in what I call the promotion of Western medicine, smallpox vaccination, the plague prophylactic, that is the inoculation which was developed by Hafkin, and so on. Now, what were the contemporary perceptions of women physicians in the late 19th century? Here is the picture of Edith Pechi Phipson. She was the first medical officer of Kama Hospital. And we will see that the first challenge to Kama Hospital came from male IMS officers, Indian Medical Service officers, most of them British, rather all of them British, in the neighboring JJ hospital. They tried to annex this donation, but the Medical Women for India Fund founders were very insistent that there will be no compromise on the aim to have an exclusive facility for women and children managed by women. The IMS said that without the control of male supervision, there would be laxity. But the Medical Women for India Fund got their way, and the hospital opened with Edith Pechi Phipson as the first medical officer. Now, she had an earlier history of what may be called a feminist struggle. She was one of the first women medical students in Britain. She was placed third in the list of honours students in chemistry after her first year at Edinburgh, and she was entitled to a scholarship. However, the professor announced that he would not give it to her and gave it to the next male student. There were indignant protests in the contemporary press at the time, but Pechi could not graduate from Edinburgh. She had to go to Bern in Switzerland and take her MD exams in German because that was the language there. And then she also had to take her exams in midwifery from Ireland in 1877. Now, she came out to Bombay, they appointed her medical officer, and she was that way a pioneer in the fact that she was the first woman medical officer at Kama Hospital. Now, another interesting perspective of the 19th century perception is that women medical students, presented a petition to the principal of Grant Medical College. 9 women students, I've got their original document with their signatures in 1884, saying that we should have parity with male students in our curriculum. Not only are we supposed to make ourselves efficient in less space of time than male students, but while male students have an opportunity of acquiring a thorough knowledge of every subject, we women get only a smattering of several subjects. Now, this would suggest that when the teaching of some subjects was done, it was glossed over by male teachers because, don't forget, it was the Victorian age. So Victorian propriety called for that kind of modesty. There is one Krishnabai Kelavkar, a physician who graduated in 1902. She spoke of a cane curtain between her and male students when she was studying at Fergusson College, Pune, before joining Grant Medical College. This lady later worked in Kolhapur and she was awarded the Kaisar-e-Hind Medal. She worked also training nurses. Then there is one more example, and that is one Miss R.A. Malabari. She gave a popular lecture on sanitary subjects, and she used diagrams, just like I am using a PPT. She used diagrams to explain the structure of the lungs, their physiological functions, and she showed that overcrowded and badly ventilated dwellings in schools were harmful to health, and she emphasized the necessity of healthy exercise for both girls and boys. And she also explained the harmful effects of tight dresses. It was the practice in 19th century to wear corsets, particularly among the Europeans and Eurasians. And these tight corsets caused deformities. Now, the plague came in 1896, and during that period, the government didn't know what to do. They didn't know where it came from. They imposed draconian measures: segregation, inspection of plague victims, disinfection of houses, and so on. Now, what I don't know if you are aware, but one of the methods of examining whether a patient had plague was to examine the armpits where the glands would be swollen. Buboes they were called, because this was bubonic plague. So the examination of women plague patients' armpits by male doctors was regarded a violation of the body. Pecci, in fact, protested the forced hospitalization of plague patients. Anyway, it is noteworthy that women physicians worked during this epidemic, one of whom was Manik Bahadurji. The other was this Annie Walk, the first graduate, who succumbed to plague. She died of plague. And the third was Cecilia Ferrere de Monte, who later served as medical officer in Kama Hospital. Now, there are some very celebrated women physicians of Western India. One of them is Anandibai Yoshi. She is really a remarkable person because at a very young age, she went all the way to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, got her MD at the Women's Medical College, and in 1886, she returned to India, was appointed physician in the women's ward at Kolhapur, but unfortunately, she died soon after returning to India. Another lady who trained at Philadelphia, who is not that well known, is Gurubai Karmarkar. She was an Indian medical missionary. She worked in the American Marathi mission for 23 years. She returned in 1893 from Philadelphia. The next person is Rakhmabhai. She is very well known because she came into the public eye when her husband filed a suit for the restitution of conjugal rights in 1884. She didn't want to go and live with her husband. She was married very young. Finally, their separation was settled through a compromise in 1887. And 2 years later, Rakhmabhai went abroad for medical studies. As you can see, she qualified for the MD in Brussels in 1894 and later trained at the London School of Medicine for Women. On her return to India, she worked at Kama Hospital and then at Surat, and she was chief doctor to the princely states of Saurashtra at Rajkot. Her popularity was actually legion. She worked both during the plague and influenza epidemics, and she was awarded the Kaisar-e-Hind Medal. One of her descendants has written a biography of hers in Marathi, but it has also been translated into English. Another person of interest is Motibai Kapadia, not very well known, also trained in Britain, and she worked in Ahmedabad for 30 years in the Victoria Jubilee Hospital. Then we have the great Dadhina Nauroji's daughter, Manikbai Dadhina Nauroji. She studied in Edinburgh. His granddaughter also studied in Edinburgh, and the granddaughter is mentioned as working in Bombay. Now there were other graduates who graduated from Grant Medical College. One of them is Dosibai Dadhina. She was the first Indian woman fellow of Bombay University. She trained in Bombay initially and then went to London, trained at the Royal Free Hospital and the London School of LSMW. She was the first Indian woman to complete her MD in tropical medicine, and on her return, she opened a maternity clinic, and she was an honorary obstetric consultant. Now, when we say honorary, we mean that they had their private practice. So they would, serve at these hospitals, at Kama Hospital for one. Most of these women doctors worked in Kama Hospital, and it's pretty obvious why. Dosibai, as I will show later, was involved with the Bombay Presidency Infant Welfare Society, the Red Cross. She organized the blood transfusion service, the blood bank, and she was the first to use radium in cancer cases among women in India. And she was also on the Boer Committee. This was 1946. And later she was awarded both the MBE and the Padma Shri. The next lady is Rani Rajvadi. She's a very interesting lady because she was the daughter of a nationalist, a reformer, and a legislator, Sir Mortality Joshi. She studied at Grant Medical College. She was a gold medalist. Then she decided to pursue further studies in England. She did not want to marry till she completed her education. So she went to England, and obviously she could afford it. So she did her LM, her LRCP, her MRCS, and not only that, she cultivated the friendship of important people like the leaders of the suffragette movement. Suffragette is the movement where women fought for their right to vote. There was a famous woman, a suffragette called Emmeline Pankhurst. She cultivated her friendship, and she also subscribed to a fund to help the Indian passive resistors in South Africa. As you can guess, this was one of those which helped Mahatma Gandhi. On her return to Bombay in 1912, Rani Rajvadi, she's called Rani, I'll tell you why. Rani Rajvadi, her maiden name was Anandibai Yoshi. Rani Rajvadi practiced medicine for 14 years. She set up her own consulting room, nursing home, operating theatre, and so on. Then, in 1926, she married Major General Raja Rajvadi of Gwalior. He was a widower, and she became very active in bodies concerned with women's health. In fact, Rajvadi was elevated in the All India Women's Conference. As you can see from the slide, she served as organizing secretary of the All India Women's Conference 1930 to 33. She was chairperson 34, 35, 39, and she had pamphlets, physiological charts, models distributed explaining epidemics, preventive measures, mohalla sanitation, water supply, and home remedies. In fact, when she was elevated to chairperson in AIWC, Sarojini Naidu said, "I remember how 25 years ago she had conquered Bombay as Dr. Miss Tai Joshi. I christened her the Spirit of India. Imagine my pleasure when I find how she has vindicated that prophetic name." Close quote. In her presidential address to the All India Women's Conference, Rajvadi said that something very pertinent. She said, legislation in social matters is difficult. It arouses too much bitterness. So she advocated voluntary and propagandist efforts. She said, matters of social hygiene, personal hygiene, care of children, nutrition, even prohibition and Swadeshi had to be accomplished through personal contact, gentle but persistent preaching and example. She was on the National Planning Committee, which was set up by the Congress and which planned various issues pertaining to health after independence, women's welfare, and she discussed the women's role in the planned economy, and she was very emphatic on the importance of nutrition, the need for regulations in housing from the point of view of public health, and she advocated a social insurance scheme to cover disability, sickness, accident, pregnancy, and childbirth. The next person is Jerusha Girard. She is a Beni Israeli, that is a Jewish person. She won scholarships and prizes. She was not as affluent as Rani Rajvadi. She started general practice in Bombay after she graduated because residence posts were not available to women. She wanted to get an MD from the London school. So she tried for a scholarship. But the scholarship was open only to Europeans and Anglo-Indians. Then the House of Tatas gave her a loan scholarship for her MD. She went to Britain, and 6 months into her stay there, the government of Bombay gave her a scholarship. She was there for 5 years, and then she did her internship at Garrett Anderson Hospital. She worked as a house surgeon. And when she returned to India after the First World War, she actually served at Lady Hardinge College and Hospital, Delhi. And then she worked here in Bangalore, in the Bangalore Maternity Hospital. But she came back to Bombay and started private practice. Again, she worked as an honorary surgeon. As you can see, she was a fellow and member of the Syndicate of Bombay University. She served as president of the Association of Medical Women in India, and after independence, she served as chairperson, Maternity and Child Welfare Advisory Committee, ICMR. And like her colleague, Dadhina, she was also awarded the MBE and Padma Shri. Now, what is very remarkable about Girard is that she was the first Indian woman to serve as medical officer in the Kama Hospital. Till then, 1928, this job was held only by British women. So, under her guidance, the hospital expanded. Undergraduate and postgraduate training facilities for women medical students were provided. Another remarkable woman was Kashibai Naurang. She also set up independent practice. She was instrumental in getting postgraduate courses run at Kama Hospital, recognized by the Bombay University. And during the Bihar earthquake, she led a delegation of medical women in 1934 to provide medical relief to the victims. Now, I would like to then move on to something which is a little interesting, and that is what were the obstetric practices, yes, the obstetric practices in the 19th century. You will be interested to know that the thesis of Anandibai Yoshi in 1886 was called Obstetrics Among Aryan Hindus. And in that, she detailed aspects of childbirth from conception to infant diseases. And she observed that in the actual childbirth, there was the dai, there was the elderly women, there was the surgeon, and she referred to the lying in room, which was fumigated with resin, and the period of 40 days seclusion after birth. giving birth, diet regulations, and the avoidance of manual labor. It's very interesting that certain precautions that Anandibai recommended are today recommended during COVID. Washing of hands and feet. Joshi said that the ancients believed in germs of infinite variety and minuteness, and therefore we should be careful. It's a very fascinating thesis, and I've just given you a few of these. Even among the westernized Parsis, a woman after giving birth was considered unclean. She was, as you may be aware, she was not allowed to touch anything. There is an autobiography written by a lady called Dosibai Jasawala, and she writes that when her daughter gave birth to her second child in India, she had to undergo this 40-day seclusion. But this practice was not observed for the firstborn, which was born in England. Then there is another amusing, report made by the mother of Rani Rajvadi. Her name was Lady Yashodabai Yoshi. Her husband was Sir. So she is Lady Yashodabai Yoshi. And she says, when the mother, the young mother, the new mother, has given birth, she is fed laddus of various types, made with khaskhas, milk, and lots of ghee. The result was that when the mother would rise from the childbed, she was several pounds plumper. That means she had become very fat. With one of her own children, Joshi's husband had experimented with donkey's milk because the child could not digest cow's milk. The lady doctor was shocked. She said, don't give the child donkey's milk because the child will become as dull as a donkey. So you have these amusing, records. Yashodabai also records that her second child, who was born prematurely, died due to the jolts in the bullock cart, she thinks. But it was a premature baby, and also, I don't know if you are aware, but there was the custom of giving opium to children, to babies, to quieten them. Rakhmabhai had a wide experience. She has left information about how women would come to the hospital for medical examination, but they would not get admitted for deliveries. Then she devised a pragmatic solution to persuade them. She delivered a pregnant sheep, and she showed how safe the procedure was. She worked most of the time without qualified nurses, carrying forceps and other obstetric instruments to remote huts and performing operations in flickering light. In one community, they would not allow the umbilical cord to be cut till it fell off. So when the baby had to be fed, the cord was also carried in a pot. She records all this in her reports. Now, what were the views of these doctors on maternal and infant mortality? Pecci said that the problem was early marriage. That is what led to sterility, ill health of the mother, puny and deformed children. Dosibai Dadhina and the other lady, Jerbanu Mistry, whose name is on the slide, they presented papers at the All India Social Service Conference in 1924, and they said 70% of infant deaths can be prevented. That's why they called it preventive obstetrics. If you supervise the woman from early pregnancy till she delivered, there would be a solution for both maternal and infant mortality. She also recommended the promotion of breastfeeding and raising the standards of midwives. She said most of the women had to muddle through pregnancy and labor as best as they could. Her colleague Jirbanu Mistry pleaded for more maternity homes, antenatal care for expectant mothers, postnatal supervision, and something which I find very interesting, and that is negotiation with the Dai. The British doctors demonized the Dai. They said the Dai is responsible for all the maternal and infant mortality. But Jirbanu Mistry recommended, if you train them, if you teach them standards of hygiene, that would improve the efficiency of the Dai, because you can't get rid of them. That was her point. And she was very concerned that women are, after all, 1/2 of the population, and therefore it is very important to raise the standard of health of women. And she said, she also pointed out something which is relevant. Many women who are childless and permanently disabled are so because of maltreatment during delivery. The other person who spoke about infant and maternal mortality, there were many of these ladies have left their writings. Jerusha Girard, she said again, large percentage of maternal mortality could be avoided. It was ignorance and superstition. As you can see, she says, old mothers and grandmothers continue to hold sway, and they impart their time-honored customs to the next generation, even as meetings were being held in town halls to organize welfare. She cautioned against imitation of the West by a few, which would only increase the prejudice of the masses against Western medicine. She has left quite a bit of writing on this. She carried out investigations into maternal deaths in the 1930s, and she found that a number of them lived in congested dwellings, and they had what is called puerperal sepsis. That is, after the birth of the child, after the childbirth, the mother gets septicemia and dies in some cases, or anemia. Anemia was another. So what she suggested was, welfare should be undertaken. There should be urgent improvements in housing, bringing down food prices, education of the public on the need for a balanced diet, and the organization of a blood transfusion service. Now the next slide, again, is a cartoon from the Hindi Punch. This is to show that when hospitals were set up exclusively for castes and communities, people went to them. So you had this Parsi lying in hospital, and this is, of course, a male doctor who was heading this hospital for 21 years, and here he is being praised as a representative of Parsi motherhood. There are other hospitals which were founded by various donors for a community. For example, the Lohanas had their hospital, the Kojas had their hospital, the Kataus had their hospital, Kataus for the Bhatia community, and so on. And there's no doubt that these, in a way, help to wear down inhibitions. By the 1920s, you have many more women physicians who graduated, and they were present in hospitals and dispensaries, increasing the number of patients, because they could discount anxieties, they could inspire confidence. There are 2 hospitals, 3, which were founded in the 1920s. King Edward Memorial, KEM, 1926. This was a very remarkable hospital because it was entirely funded by Indians and staffed by Indians. There was the Wadia Maternity Hospital and the adjacent Bai Jiyabai Wadia Hospital. They're all functioning even today, and they are all in that mill district. Now, there is another aspect. I don't know how much time I have. Gupta ji?
Still have around 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. Now, who looked after maternal and infant health care? The physicians, of course. But the government of Bombay and the Bombay Municipal Corporation provided some funding, but they did not get too involved in women's welfare. So many of these organizations whose names you see on the slide were semi-official in that they were initiated. For example, the Lady Willingdon scheme was initiated by the Bombay Sanitary Association, which was itself a semi-official organization. Again, the purpose was to provide antenatal and postnatal care and to train Indian midwives. Now that was not so easy because the very concept of a midwife was not always acceptable. There is still faith in the Dal. So Jerbanu's suggestion of training the eyes, and that's how you have the Lady Wilson Village Maternity Association to train village dyes. Anyway, as far as Bombay city was concerned, this Lady Willingdon scheme had health visitors, maternity homes, and they would constantly send cases to Kama Hospital to treat the abnormal cases. There were also infant welfare centers where babies would be brought, and what they called infant management was taught. Now the Sanitary Commissioner's report of 1915 claimed that over 62% of all childbirths in Bombay city were attended by municipal nurses and midwives. However, it must be borne in mind that many mill workers went to their villages in Konkan, in Ratnagiri. They went there for delivery and came back after the babies were born. Nevertheless, this is their claim, and infant mortality figures did drop from 41% in 1921 to 24.5% in 1937. And the numbers of confinements in maternity institutions also doubled. The next organization is the Bombay Presidency Infant Welfare Society. One thing which is very interesting with whether it was Lady Willingdon or this Bombay Presidency Infant Welfare or Lady Wilson is the association of the wives of British officials. They were the patrons. And the colonial hope was that by this method, these bodies would establish a bond between the rulers and the ruled. Now this Bombay Presidency Infant Welfare Society worked with children up to the age of 5. They were brought to those centers, they were weighed, bathed, provided with milk, treated for minor ailments by a lady doctor. The society claimed that there was a progressive decline in death rates from 550 per 1,000 births to 250 per 1,000 births, and this was due to its work. The next organization is the Bombay Presidency Baby and Health Week Association. This was founded at the initiative of 2 Indians. One was a reformer called Devdutt, Gopal Krishna Devdutt. He was a follower of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and a doctor, H.V. Tilak. It was funded by public subscriptions and donations, and of course a Government of Bombay grant. Now this organization held exhibitions. Like today we are using technology. At that time the technology was only displaying charts and models and making simple medical and educational films, colored posters, and what was called magic lantern talks, street lectures. The subjects were flies, ventilation, milk. These were the topics. And precautions, how to avoid cholera, malaria, typhoid, TB, and so on. Now, the next slide is, this is Cecilia De Monte, who was connected with the Bombay Presidency Infant Welfare Society, and she served as medical officer at Karma Hospital. She served in Karma Hospital for many, many years. Now, this is a very interesting cover, which I found at the Rockefeller Archive Center in New York. It's the report of the Bombay Baby and Health Week Association. Now, what is interesting is the cover. The cover shows the message, how the message of reduction of infant mortality was conveyed. It says, a healthy baby is a national asset, as you can see. Care of the expectant mother ensures the health of the baby. Half of sickness and deaths in babies is preventable. And it portrays the mother receiving advice. You see how she has her, the way she is standing. She is listening to the advice given by the doctor who is carrying a medical bag. Both of the women are portrayed in Maharashtrian attire, and there is a statement here being made by this picture. One is that women doctors were involved in this campaign, and two is that mothers would heed advice from their own gender. Now, how did these women doctors perceive their role? Woman as healer. This was an article written in the Journal of Association of Medical Women in India, and it pointed out that the study of medicine for women was regarded unnatural, and it tended to deaden her feelings. And there was something in it that was repugnant to the social order of things. But soon, public opinion began to realize that there was ample scope for both men and women to share in the noble work for the welfare of humanity. This lady who wrote this article was a graduate of Grant Medical College. Her name was Hazel Machado. She noted that gradually attendance by a woman doctor on her own sex became the rule. However, there were women medical students who dropped out midway through their course to get married, or there were others who qualified and did not work, and that was unfortunate. Girard asserted that marriage was no bar to medicine. On the other hand, it brought into relief the best qualities of sympathy and fellow feeling, she said. There was another lady called Anandibai Mehta. She was an anesthetist at Karma Hospital. And she said, let us resolve that we shall not rest till the message of medical relief is carried to the humblest cottage. Few professions offer such unique opportunities for public service such as ours. In fact, in an article which she wrote in 1933, she said, patients are so fond of this Karma Hospital that they consider it their birthright to come here for confinement. So you have mothers delivering babies, and then the babies growing up and delivering babies, and so on and so forth. And Mehta said physicians learned through trial and error. And in fact, she describes one epidemic among babies in 1922, which took a heavy toll, and they didn't know what caused it. And they had all kinds of tests done at the Hafkin Institute. But it turned out later that the babies with infections had to be isolated. And the mothers had to feed the babies because that gives the babies immunity. Now, there are other doctors in healthcare, like this lady Malini Suktankar, who was the first to be appointed chairperson of the school committee and served on the health subcommittee of the BMC. She emphasized the need for adequate nutrition. And then there are others like Kashibai Naurang, who had attended the inauguration of the Bombay Sanitary Association. She attended the inauguration of the Anti-Tuberculosis League. and she said tuberculosis is wreaking havoc among the poor. Jairmanu Mistry, whom I referred to earlier, she was a member of the Indian Prostitution Committee, and she, along with 3 others, voted against the recommendations for regulation and punishment for prostitution. She was in fact chairperson of the parliamentary subcommittee of the Bombay Presidency Women's Council, and she also was concerned with improving standards of cinema films and working with women in jails and mental hospitals. An interesting lady, Krishnabai Kelavkar, whom I mentioned earlier. She was on the only woman on the Central Committee of the Bombay Medical Congress in 1909. And then you have these 3 other ladies, Firoz by Captain, Gul by Doctor, Singara and Shirin Commissariat, Hazel Machado, whom I have mentioned. She was concerned with instructing mill workers on sanitation, hygiene and first aid. And she did work during the influenza epidemic, which, as you know, is very much in the news now because COVID has recalled the story of influenza. And finally, there is Myrtle Machado, who worked with those who contracted venereal diseases, League for Combating Venereal Diseases. Now, I would like to just briefly mention this lady, though I have not covered nursing. Her name is Tamina Adrangala, and she was a very important figure in the history of nursing. She began as a trainee nurse in the JJ hospital, and then she trained in London, and then she came back and she rose to be ward sister, assistant matron, tutor, and finally nursing superintendent. As you can see, she was a recipient also of the Kaisar-e-Hind Medal, Florence Nightingale Medal. She joined the Trained Nurses Association of India, and she was president of that. She was on the expert committee on nursing at the WHO. Now, this is a picture of the Kama Hospital and the nurses attending to a patient. Now, I would like to conclude. This is a picture from Hindi Punch again. Hindi Punch would often depict Mumbai as a woman, always as a woman. Here she is in distress because the wards of the city of Bombay are stricken down with malarial fever. I have many more such slides where Mumbai, she's called Mumbai or Mumba, and she is stricken by disease. Now, in conclusion, I would like to make a few points. One is, they did establish what was called the Association of Medical Women in India. This was established by the British doctors in 1907. And there were 26 members who were Indians, but all the council members were British. Rakhmabhai was the first to become a member of the council. Now, they were primarily concerned with their own interests, the interest of the British doctors. Why? Because British doctors wanted to find a space here in India. It was difficult for them to find a space in Britain because male doctors would not let them in. So, they wanted to find a space here. And it's interesting that Indian women doctors thought that this was not right. In fact, you have a lady called Margaret Balfour. She was British. She held that women's entry into medicine is easier in India because the women patients have more confidence in women doctors here. And once the woman became a success, patients just flocked to her. This is Margaret Balfour. She was a very important lady in the women's medical service, and she has left works observations and so on. She was the first chief medical officer of the Women's Medical Service, but this is her observation, that it was easier for Indian women to enter into medicine than perhaps her comparison is with Britain. However, Indian women were not in the top ranks. They were always in the second rung of medical administration. And therefore, Jerusha Girard becoming medical officer at Kama Hospital in 1928 was a landmark. Thereafter, of course, you have more such entries. The other very interesting thing is, what is it that women specialized in? Gynecology and obstetrics.
Yes.
This was their forte. Women could perform operations of fibroid tumors of the uterus, cystic tumors of the ovary, but general surgery she did not get. A woman doctor would only be called in for amputation, setting of fractures, cataracts. It was also that, not that it was, Margaret Balfour may have said it was easy, but there was a contemporary newspaper called Hindu Prakash, which said that female medical employees do not like the male interference and male supervision, which is prejudicial to their efficiency, and also disconsonant with their dignity.
Ma'am, we are running short of time now. Can we wind up easily? So that we have few questions. We have few questions as well.
Okay, very quickly.
Yes.
Women's health was a space left to women doctors, as I said, and Rani Rajvadi sent a memorial in 1914 saying that women's medical service posts should be left to Indian women. Okay. I would like to conclude by just saying one thing, and that is, these women are very important in our story. They were very vital intermediaries who brought Western medicine and better hygiene, sanitation, etc. to their fellow women. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I...
No, all right, ma'am. Thank you very much. You have indeed given us a great insight of what was happening during the late 19th century, during the later part of the 19th century and earlier part of the 20th century. We do not have much questions for you, but we still have some observations, and we would like to seek your comments and your own views on that. Yes, the one is that हमारे भारत में भी जैसा आपने बताया, I hope you are comfortable if I speak in Hindi.
Of course.
Yes, great ma'am. So,
Yeah.
so yes, women जो contribution है health sector में, आपने बताया that started somewhere in the later part of 19th century, 1886 and after that, and then it is continued. Still we see, if we see in today, that the women contribution in medical colleges, in medical hospitals is tremendous. I still remember that during the later part of the 20th century, it is around 1995 or 96 or so, people had started talking about having reservations in medical seats for male children, for male persons, for boys. Nevertheless, yes, we have got to see all those things, but still we see as far as the administration, at the top administration is concerned, still we see very little representation from the women medical scientists everywhere. It is particularly in this scenario, even today, what we see that almost all the pictures, in fact, I had not seen even a single picture where जहाँ पर कि लोगों को मेल लोग वैक्सीन लगा रहे हों कोविड का. ऑल द जितने भी तस्वीरें हमें सामने देखने को मिल रही हैं, उन सब में वुमेन हेल्थ वर्कर्स ही सबको वैक्सीन लगाते हुए नज़र आती हैं. इतने सब के बावजूद भी अभी भी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में, टॉप एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में वुमेन मेडिकल साइंटिस्ट और डॉक्टर्स नहीं हैं. अभी तक हमारे पास एक ही FRS हैं वुमेन, गगनदीप कांग, जो कि उनको कि पिछले 5 सालों में FRS में मिला है. योर ऑब्जर्वेशन मैम प्लीज दिस.
Yeah, you're very right. And you know, it's also perhaps because women have to combine their roles as mothers, as wives, and so on. And you know, like I mentioned, by and large, women did, in those years, took to these fields, gynecology, obstetrics, ophthalmology, and so on. But you are right in that, that's a very valid observation you have made, that all the lower rung of healthcare workers, you know, the ASHA workers, the Anandibai workers, and the girls who are giving the shots are all women. That's a very relevant observation that you made. And you also made this point that even today, there aren't too many in the top, though you have Soumya Swaminathan at the WHO, which makes us all very proud because there she is at the WHO. Yes, it's a fact, there's no doubt about it. But I feel that they had, I don't know, my study of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they had greater acceptability. And maybe even today that is so, I don't know. Maybe an elderly lady would prefer to get a vaccination from a young healthcare worker, you know, a woman, perhaps, I don't know. So that it is a very relevant observation that you have made. But I feel that yes, there is greater empathy.
Yes, there is greater empathy. Yes, you are right. But we would like to finish with the two of your statements which you made very importantly, which are still prolonging in our society. That is, legislation in social concerns is difficult. We had seen the anti-smoking movements. We had seen the vaccine movements for polio, even for this COVID-19 vaccines. And yes, ma'am, the baseline which you had made today, that a healthy baby is indeed a national asset. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mridula. It was nice listening to you, and we indeed like to listen to you again and again on the same forum or on other forums. We salute your work. We salute your dedication for the cause of letting people know what has happened during the early 19th century, late 19th and early 20th century. Thank you. So viewers, we will be back again next Friday on 8th of October with Professor Rani SRS Rao from Laboratory for Theory and Mathematical Modeling, Medical College of Georgia and Department of Mathematics, Georgia University, Augusta University, USA. वो हमसे बात करेंगे भारतीय प्राचीन और आधुनिक गणित तथा कृत्रिम बुद्धिमत्ता, जिसको कि हम आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस भी कहते हैं. उनका साथ देने के लिए हमारे साथ CSIR से होंगे डॉक्टर राजेश पी बरनवाल. तो व्यूअर्स, एक बार फिर से हम आपसे मिलेंगे अगले फ्राइडे सुबह 10 बजे 8 अक्टूबर. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Thank you.
नमस्कार.